Eleanor Hartwell had perfected the art of invisibility. At her own sister's wedding, she stood hidden behind a marble pillar in the grand ballroom of Ashford Manor, watching the glittering assembly celebrate Charlotte's triumph. The year was 1815, and society had rendered its verdict on the Hartwell sisters long ago. Charlotte was the diamond, Eleanor the overlooked shadow. But when the ballroom doors opened and the Duke of Ravenswood entered, a man whose very name made debutantes tremble and mothers avert their eyes, everything changed. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and then, impossibly, his cold grey eyes found Eleanor in her hiding place. He crossed the floor with deliberate steps, and before the entire assembly, the most feared man in England knelt before the forgotten sister and extended his hand. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has traveled. Eleanor Hartwell had learned long ago that some women were born to shine, while others existed merely to reflect that brightness. At 22 years old, she had accepted her role in the carefully choreographed dance of Regency society with a resignation that bordered on grace. The Hartwell estate in Hampshire was a modest but respectable property, its revenues sufficient to maintain appearances, but insufficient to launch two daughters into the marriage market with equal vigour. Their mother, the formidable Lady Marguerite Hartwell, had made the calculation before Eleanor could even spell her own name. Charlotte, 3 years Eleanor's junior, possessed the golden curls, rosebud lips, and effortless charm that could secure the family's future. Eleanor, with her dark hair, serious grey eyes, and preference for books over balls, would simply have to be practical. "Eleanor, do straighten your posture." Her mother's voice cut through the morning room like a blade through silk. Lady Margaret sat at her writing desk, composing yet another letter to secure Charlotte's position in London society. "You slouch like a merchant's daughter. How many times must I remind you?" Eleanor marked her place in Paradise Lost and adjusted her spine, though no one was looking at her anyway. Charlotte sat by the window, a vision in pale blue muslin, practicing her watercolours with the kind of artistic mediocrity that gentlemen found endearing. Their brother Thomas had long since fled to his gentleman's club in London, escaping the suffocating atmosphere of feminine scheming. "Mama, must Eleanor come to London for the season?" Charlotte's voice carried the particular sweetness she employed when requesting something selfish. "I should hate for her to be uncomfortable at all those dreadful balls." "Your sister will fulfill her duties as a chaperone," Lady Marguerite replied crisply. "She has made her peace with her circumstances. Haven't you, Eleanor?" "Yes, Mamma." The words came automatically, smooth as stones worn by water. And so Eleanor had found herself in London for Charlotte's second season, watching from the periphery as her sister collected admirers like rare butterflies. There had been the Honourable Mr. Whitmore, dismissed for insufficient fortune; Viscount Ashby, rejected for his mother's disagreeable temperament; Lord Pemberton, who committed the unforgivable sin of showing interest in Eleanor during a country dance, swiftly redirected by their mother's strategic interventions. But then came the prize that made every previous suitor pale into insignificance: Mr. Harrison Sterling, heir to the Earl of Ashford. Harrison Sterling possessed everything a fortune-hunting mama could desire: an ancient title awaiting inheritance, 15,000 a year, a Palladian mansion in Kent, and a townhouse in Mayfair. His lineage traced back to the Conquest, his education had been Eton and Oxford, and his prospects were, by any measure, exceptional. That he was also unbearably pompous seemed to concern no one but Eleanor. "The Sterling connection will secure Charlotte's position among the first families of England," Lady Marguerite had proclaimed when the courtship began. "The Earl has only the one son. Charlotte will be a countess. A countess." Eleanor had watched her sister's whirlwind courtship with growing unease. Harrison Sterling moved through the world with the particular arrogance of men who had never faced genuine challenge. His compliments to Charlotte were practiced, his attentiveness performative. He spoke to Eleanor perhaps twice during the entire season, both times to request she fetch Charlotte from whatever room she had wandered into. "He has a strong character," Charlotte had insisted when Eleanor dared to voice concerns. "Decisive men appear commanding, Eleanor. You cannot understand, having never been courted yourself." The barb landed as intended, and Eleanor retreated into silence. The engagement was announced in the Times with suitable fanfare. The wedding was planned for June at Ashford Manor, with 400 guests, 8 courses for the wedding breakfast, and flowers imported from 3 counties. Charlotte would marry in Brussels lace and Russian diamonds borrowed from the Sterling family vault. Eleanor would wear dove grey and stand in the shadows where she belonged. The week before the wedding, Eleanor walked through Hatchard's bookshop on Piccadilly, her one refuge in London's relentless social machinery. She was examining a new translation of Dante when she became aware of a presence beside her, a tall, elderly woman in unfashionable but expensive clothing, her sharp eyes examining Eleanor with unsettling intensity. "You're one of the Hartwell girls," the woman stated rather than asked. "The elder one, Eleanor." "I am, though I cannot claim the acquaintance, madam. Lady Agatha Pemberton. Your mother would consider me disreputable, which is the highest compliment I've received in decades." The woman's smile was fierce. "I knew your father's mother. You have her look, the intelligence that made people nervous." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, a hairline crack in the armor of acceptance she had built. "I didn't know my grandmother well. She died when I was young. She was magnificent. Spoke 4 languages, corresponded with natural philosophers, scandalized everyone by attending anatomy lectures disguised as a man." Lady Agatha's gaze turned assessing. "Your mother has wasted you, child. But perhaps it's not too late. Come visit me in Russell Square after this circus of a wedding is complete. I suspect you'll need somewhere to recover." Before Eleanor could respond, Charlotte's voice rang out across the bookshop. "Eleanor, Mama is waiting in the carriage. We have 17 items remaining on the wedding preparations list." Lady Agatha pressed a calling card into Eleanor's palm. "Russell Square," she repeated softly, "when you're ready to stop being invisible." Now, standing in her bedroom at Ashford Manor the night before Charlotte's wedding, Eleanor studied that card by candlelight. The house thrummed with activity, guests arriving, servants rushing, Charlotte's nervous laughter echoing from the bridal suite. Eleanor's own dress hung on the wardrobe like a grey ghost, perfectly appropriate for the forgotten sister. She touched the card once more before placing it carefully in her reticule. Tomorrow, Charlotte would become Mrs. Harrison Sterling, future Countess of Ashford, and Eleanor would remain exactly what she had always been, the shadow sister, present but unseen, necessary but unimportant. She could not have known that tomorrow would shatter everything she thought she understood about her place in the world, that a man whose reputation made strong men pale would see her when no one else had, that her carefully constructed invisibility was about to become spectacularly, irrevocably impossible. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, Eleanor Hartwell closed her eyes and prepared to fulfill the role assigned to her since birth. Witness to someone else's happiness, architect of her own obscurity. The last thought before sleep claimed her was unexpected, unbidden. What if there's more? She dismissed it quickly. Hope, she had learned, was a luxury she could not afford. The morning of Charlotte's wedding dawned with the kind of perfect English weather that seemed ordered specially for important occasions. Ashford Manor gleamed in the June sunlight, its honey-coloured stone and manicured gardens providing a backdrop worthy of the society event everyone had anticipated for months. Eleanor woke before dawn, her stomach twisted with nameless anxiety. She dressed in her grey silk with mechanical precision, fastening each button as though preparing armour rather than attending a celebration. The face in her mirror looked pale, composed, unremarkable, exactly as it should. Charlotte's bridal suite was chaos incarnate. The bride stood on a platform, while 3 seamstresses made final adjustments to the Brussels lace, her golden curls being tortured into an elaborate coiffure by a French lady's maid, her mother directing operations like a general commanding troops. "Eleanor, finally," Lady Marguerite snapped. "Make yourself useful. Check that the seating arrangements haven't been disturbed in the ballroom. And for heaven's sake, try to look pleasant. Your expression suggests you're attending a funeral." Eleanor escaped gratefully, making her way through the manor's opulent corridors. Ashford Manor represented everything the Sterling family valued: ancient lineage, crushing formality, oppressive wealth. The paintings on the walls were old masters, the furniture Jacobean, the atmosphere as warm as a mausoleum. The ballroom was a masterpiece of excess. Thousands of white roses and orange blossoms transformed the space into a garden of calculated perfection. The seating arrangements reflected society's rigid hierarchy: nobles near the front, lesser gentry gradually fading toward the periphery. Eleanor found her own name card at a table partially obscured by a marble pillar. Naturally. "Perfect view, wouldn't you say?" The sardonic voice belonged to Lady Agatha Pemberton, who had appeared beside Eleanor like a theatrical ghost. She wore purple silk that would have been shocking on a woman 30 years younger. "Your mother has positioned you where you can observe, but not participate." How thoughtful. "Lady Agatha, I didn't expect to see you here. The Earl and I are distant cousins. I attend family obligations the way others attend public executions. Morbid curiosity mixed with a certain grim satisfaction." Her eyes studied Eleanor with uncomfortable perception. "You don't want this wedding to happen?" It wasn't a question. Eleanor felt her carefully maintained composure waver. "My sister's happiness is paramount." "Darling girl, that's not an answer. That's what you've been taught to say." Lady Agatha squeezed Eleanor's hand briefly. "Remember Russell Square. When this all comes crashing down, and it will, you'll need somewhere to land." Before Eleanor could respond, a ripple of excitement moved through the arriving guests. The ceremony was beginning. The wedding proceeded with clockwork precision. Charlotte looked ethereal in her lace and diamonds, floating down the aisle on their father's arm, while 400 guests rose in rustling acknowledgement. Harrison Sterling stood at the altar, resplendent in his formal coat, his handsome face arranged in an expression of appropriate solemnity. Eleanor watched from her pillar-adjacent seat, something cold settling in her chest. Her sister looked beautiful, triumphant, and utterly alone. Harrison's gaze on Charlotte was proprietary rather than adoring, his smile more satisfied than joyful. The vows were exchanged. The register was signed. Charlotte was now Mrs. Harrison Sterling, and the crowd erupted in polite applause. The wedding breakfast was equally flawless. 8 courses served on Sèvres porcelain, champagne flowing like water, toasts delivered with practiced eloquence. Eleanor barely tasted the food, her unease growing with each passing hour. Charlotte sat at the head table beside her new husband, laughing at his jokes with slightly too much enthusiasm, her hand clutching his arm with slightly too much force. Then came the ball. As evening descended, the ballroom filled with guests ready to dance away the night. Eleanor retreated to her position behind the marble pillar, content to observe as always. Charlotte and Harrison led the first dance, the picture of aristocratic perfection. Eleanor watched her sister's face as they turned through the figures, watched Charlotte's smile falter when Harrison whispered something, watched her eyes dart nervously toward a pretty blonde woman dancing nearby, Miss Arabella Thornton, the Earl of Ashford's ward. Eleanor had met her briefly during the engagement festivities, a vapid creature whose primary accomplishment seemed to be looking decorative. Something was wrong. Eleanor felt it in her bones, the way animals sense approaching storms. The first dance ended. Harrison escorted Charlotte to the side of the ballroom, leaving her with a group of matrons, while he himself moved toward the refreshment table where Miss Thornton stood, conspicuously alone. They spoke for several minutes, their postures suggesting a familiarity that made Eleanor's skin prickle with warning. The second dance began. Harrison did not return to his bride. Charlotte stood among the matrons, her smile growing increasingly brittle as her new husband danced with Miss Thornton, then with Lady Carmichael's daughter, then with Mrs. Winter's niece. Eleanor watched her mother's face darken, watched her father shift uncomfortably, watched the other guests begin to notice and whisper. After the third dance with someone other than his bride, Harrison Sterling finally approached Charlotte. Eleanor couldn't hear what was said, but she saw her sister's face flood with relief, saw her extend her hand for the dance she had clearly been expecting. Harrison didn't take it. Instead, he turned to Miss Arabella Thornton, who had materialized beside him as though choreographed. What happened next occurred with such swift brutality that Eleanor would replay it in her mind for months afterward, each detail etched in acid. Harrison Sterling, in the middle of his own wedding ball, with 400 guests watching, took Miss Thornton's hand and announced in a voice pitched to carry across the ballroom, "It is time the truth was spoken. Arabella, my dear, has honored me with her acceptance. We have reached an understanding that supersedes all prior obligations." The ballroom fell into shocked silence. Charlotte's face drained of all color. "Harrison, what are you—" "We're married. We were married today. A circumstance I intend to rectify." His voice was cold, clinical. "The marriage remains unconsummated and can be annulled on grounds of coercion. My father insisted I marry someone of adequate breeding, and your mother's manipulations left me little choice. But I will not be trapped by a grasping woman of inferior family when my heart belongs elsewhere." Eleanor felt the world tilt sideways. She stepped forward instinctively, but her mother's hand shot out, grabbing her arm with painful force. "Don't," Lady Marguerite hissed. "You'll make it worse. But Charlotte is ruined regardless. Don't compound her disaster with yours." Eleanor watched helplessly as her sister stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, her white wedding dress suddenly looking like a shroud, her face a mask of devastation. The whispers started immediately, 400 voices buzzing with delighted scandal. The Earl of Ashford stepped forward, his face apoplectic. "Harrison, this is unconscionable." "Is it, father? You've been wanting me to marry Arabella for years. Her father's shipping fortune dwarfs the Hartwells' resources. Now you'll have your wish, and I'll have a wife with beauty and wealth, rather than just delusions of grandeur." Miss Thornton smiled, a small, triumphant curve of lips that made Eleanor's blood boil. She stepped closer to Harrison, her hand sliding possessively along his arm. "I hope there are no hard feelings, Charlotte, dear. Harrison and I have been in love for months. Surely you suspected." Charlotte made a small, broken sound, not quite a sob, too wounded for mere tears. She looked at her mother, her father, the assembled crowd, finally at Eleanor. In her sister's eyes, Eleanor saw something die. Lady Marguerite drew herself up with icy dignity. "We will not remain where my daughter has been so grievously insulted. Come, Charlotte, we are leaving." But before anyone could move, Charlotte did something unexpected. She laughed. It was a terrible sound, edged with hysteria and rage. "Of course. How could I be so blind? Was I so very dull, Harrison? So unworthy of even basic honesty?" Her voice rose, cracking. "You married me this morning, spoke vows before God, and now you discard me like unwanted goods before the day is even finished. It was a mistake that will be corrected." Harrison's voice held no remorse, only irritation at her public display. "You should be grateful the annulment will leave you technically unmarried, though your reputation will naturally suffer. Perhaps your sister can benefit from your cautionary tale." The casual cruelty of that final barb, the dismissive inclusion of Eleanor in Charlotte's humiliation, struck like a physical blow. Eleanor felt something inside her snap, years of silent acceptance shattering like overtaxed glass. She stepped away from her mother's restraining hand and walked into the center of the ballroom. Her grey dress seemed suddenly appropriate, not invisible but steely, determined. "Mr. Sterling," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the whispers, "you are beneath contempt. History will remember you as a coward who broke his vows and humiliated a woman before an audience because you lacked the courage to be honest. Charlotte deserves 1,000 times better than your hollow charm and performative nobility." Harrison's face twisted with disdain. "And who are you to speak? The spinster sister, so unremarkable your own family forgot you existed. Return to your shadows, Eleanor. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns anyone with basic human decency," Eleanor retorted, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "You're not a gentleman. You're a villain dressed in expensive tailoring." The ballroom erupted in scandalized murmurs. Lady Marguerite looked ready to faint. Charlotte stood motionless, tears finally streaming down her porcelain cheeks. And then the ballroom doors opened. The crowd's attention shifted instantly, whispers transforming into stunned silence. Eleanor turned with everyone else and felt her breath catch. The Duke of Ravenswood had arrived. Christopher Ashford Montague, the 5th Duke of Ravenswood, was not supposed to be at this wedding. No one had expected him. No one had truly wanted him. His reputation preceded him like winter frost, chilling every room he entered. At 32 years old, he had inherited his title at 21 under circumstances darkly whispered about, but never fully explained. His estate in Northumberland was vast and profitably managed. His fortune was legendary. His temper was infamous. He had fought on the peninsula, earning decorations that he never wore. He had been engaged once, the lady in question mysteriously breaking the betrothal days before the wedding, fleeing to the continent and never returning to England. Rumors swirled that he had killed a man in a duel over an insult never specified, that his own father had feared him, that he kept his heart as frozen as his northern estate. Mothers warned their daughters away. Men spoke of him with wary respect. The town called him the Winter Duke, beautiful as ice and just as unforgiving. He stood in the ballroom doorway like a dark angel, his formal black evening wear emphasizing broad shoulders and a lean, powerful frame. His face was striking rather than conventionally handsome. Strong bones, a firm mouth, and eyes the color of storm clouds that surveyed the scene with penetrating intelligence. Those grey eyes moved across the frozen tableau. Harrison Sterling and his blonde accomplice Charlotte in her wedding dress and tears, the scandalized crowd. And then, impossibly, his gaze found Eleanor. She felt it like physical contact, his attention focusing on her with such intensity that the rest of the ballroom seemed to fade into watercolor blurriness. For a moment, lasting both seconds and eternities, the Winter Duke and the Shadow Sister regarded each other across a crowded ballroom. Then Christopher Ashford Montague began to walk. The crowd parted instinctively, people stepping back as though from an approaching predator. He moved with deliberate purpose, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She was suddenly aware of every ruinous thing about her appearance. The plain grey dress, the simple hairstyle, the complete absence of beauty or charm that might explain why the most feared man in England was crossing the ballroom toward her. He stopped directly before her. Up close, he was even more formidable. Tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, those storm-grey depths holding something she couldn't decipher. And then the Duke of Ravenswood did something that would be discussed in London drawing rooms for the next decade. He knelt, in the middle of the ballroom, before 400 witnesses. Christopher Montague lowered himself to one knee and extended his hand toward Eleanor Hartwell. "Miss Eleanor," his voice was dark velvet, pitched for her ears but carrying in the absolute silence, "would you do me the extraordinary honor of dancing with me?" Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand, her mind utterly blank. This couldn't be happening. Dukes didn't kneel before spinster daughters of minor gentry. The Winter Duke didn't kneel before anyone. Your Grace, I don't understand." "Understanding can wait. The dance cannot." His eyes held something that might have been amusement, might have been challenge. "Unless you prefer to let Sterling's theatrics dominate the evening's conversation." Eleanor realized what he was offering. A scandal to eclipse a scandal. A spectacle to redirect attention from Charlotte's humiliation. Why he would do such a thing she couldn't fathom. But in that moment, with her sister's tears still wet on her cheeks and Harrison Sterling's smug face in her peripheral vision, Eleanor made a choice. She placed her hand in the Duke's. His fingers closed around hers with surprising warmth, and he rose in one fluid motion, drawing her toward the center of the ballroom. The musicians, well trained in navigating aristocratic drama, began a waltz. Christopher Montague pulled Eleanor into the proper frame, his hand at her waist, radiating heat through the silk of her dress. They began to move, and Eleanor discovered the Winter Duke danced with the same commanding grace he brought to everything else. "You have questions," he observed, his voice low enough for privacy in their small circle of movement. "Your Grace, I have 1,000 questions." "Christopher, if we're to be the subject of rampant speculation, we should at least be on familiar terms." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "You spoke well. Sterling is indeed a coward. You heard that? I hear everything worth hearing. It's why people find me unsettling." He executed a flawless turn, guiding her with effortless precision. "Your sister, she'll recover. Publicly humiliated, yes. Ruined by traditional standards, certainly, but free of a man who would have made her miserable. Some might consider that a fair exchange." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, not for herself, but for Charlotte, for the wreckage of her sister's dreams. She wanted to be a countess. She wanted security. The title was merely the vehicle. Christopher's eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "There are other paths to security, Miss Eleanor. Some of them considerably more interesting than becoming Harrison Sterling's decorative wife." As they danced, Eleanor became aware of the whispers building around them, the shocked faces, the frantic whispering. Lady Agatha Pemberton watched from the periphery with undisguised delight. Charlotte had been ushered away by their parents, spared the additional spectacle of the Winter Duke's attention to her sister. "Why are you doing this?" Eleanor asked finally. "You don't know me. You have no obligation to my family." "I know enough." His voice dropped even lower, a rumble she felt in her bones. "I know you stood in the center of a hostile ballroom and spoke truth when silence would have been safer. I know you're intelligent, brave, and wasted on people who can't see beyond their own narrow ambitions." His eyes captured hers. "And I know that I've been watching you all evening, hidden behind that ridiculous pillar, observing everything with the kind of perception most people never develop." "You watched me!" Eleanor's voice came out breathless. "I did. And when you stepped forward to defend your sister, when you called Sterling exactly what he is despite the social consequences, I made a decision." The waltz was ending, the final notes hanging in the air. Christopher leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Come to Ravenswood, Eleanor. Leave this circus behind and let me show you what your life could become when you stop making yourself invisible." Before Eleanor could process the extraordinary invitation, the music stopped. Christopher stepped back, bowed with perfect formality, and released her hand. "I'll send a carriage to Russell Square in 1 week," he said clearly. "I suspect Lady Agatha will be hosting you by then. Don't disappoint me by refusing." Then he was gone, striding from the ballroom with the same commanding presence he'd brought to it, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the center of the dance floor, with every eye fixed on her and her heart beating a frantic, terrified, exhilarated rhythm. The Shadow Sister had just been offered sunlight by the most dangerous man in England. Behind her, she heard Harrison Sterling's voice, petulant and uncertain. "Who does he think he is, interfering in private matters?" Lady Agatha's response carried clearly. "He thinks he's the Duke of Ravenswood, you insufferable boy, which means he's worth 50 of you on your best day. And he just made it known that Eleanor Hartwell has his attention. Good luck finding anyone willing to cross him." Eleanor stood frozen, her hand still warm from Christopher's touch, her mind reeling. 1 week. Russell Square, Ravenswood. A choice that would change everything. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Hartwell was seen. The question was whether she had the courage to step fully into that light, or if she would retreat back into the comfortable shadows where she'd spent her entire existence. The ballroom erupted into chaos around her, speculation, scandal, shocked whispers. But Eleanor heard only one thing, the echo of Christopher Montague's invitation, dark and promising as a summer storm. Come to Ravenswood. She took a deep breath and made her decision. True to Lady Agatha's prediction, Eleanor found herself installed in the Russell Square townhouse exactly 3 days after the disaster of Charlotte's wedding. The aftermath had been predictably catastrophic. Lady Marguerite had retreated to her rooms in a state of nervous collapse, alternating between blaming Eleanor for making spectacles and blaming Charlotte for being jilted. Charlotte herself had locked her door and refused all visitors, her sobs audible throughout the Hartwell London house. Their father, overwhelmed by the dual scandals, had escaped to his club and showed no signs of returning. The annulment proceedings began immediately, Harrison Sterling sparing no expense to expedite the dissolution of a marriage that had lasted less than 12 hours. The scandal sheets had a field day. Wedding becomes unwedding, Sterling heir chooses love over duty, read one particularly inflammatory headline. Another proclaimed, the Winter Duke's surprise, Ravenswood shows interest in jilted sister. That second headline had created almost as much speculation as the original scandal. Why would the Duke of Ravenswood, who had shown no interest in society for years, single out Eleanor Hartwell? What was his connection to the family? What were his intentions? Eleanor had no answers, only the memory of storm-grey eyes and a hand extended in invitation. On the third day, Lady Agatha's carriage arrived at the Hartwell residence with a brief note. Come to Russell Square. Bring your books and whatever remains of your dignity. Leave the rest behind. Eleanor had packed her trunk with shaking hands, said goodbye to a sister who wouldn't open her door, and left her mother's house without a backward glance. Lady Agatha's townhouse was a revelation. Where the Hartwell residence emphasized propriety and social climbing, Russell Square breathed intellectual curiosity and eccentric comfort. The drawing room overflowed with books, not fashionable novels arranged decoratively, but worn volumes in multiple languages, scientific texts, philosophical treatises. The walls displayed maps of distant countries, anatomical drawings that would make Lady Marguerite faint, and portraits of women who looked fierce rather than decorative. Welcome to civilization, Lady Agatha announced, guiding Eleanor through rooms that smelled of beeswax and old paper. You'll find this house operates on different principles than your mother's. Here, we value intelligence over marriageability, honest conversation over polite lies, and personal growth over social performance. Eleanor felt something in her chest loosen, a tightness she hadn't realized she was carrying. Why are you helping me? Because someone helped me once, and I've been paying it forward for 40 years. Lady Agatha settled into a wing-back chair, gesturing for Eleanor to do the same. Also, because you remind me of myself at your age. Clever, overlooked, and desperately in need of someone to tell you that the life you've been living is only one possibility among thousands. Over the following days, Eleanor discovered the truth of that statement. Lady Agatha's circle included blue stockings, writers, naturalists and reformers, women and men who discussed ideas rather than gossip, who valued contribution over connections. Eleanor found herself at dinner parties where the conversation covered Greek philosophy, the geological formation of the earth, and the moral implications of the Corn Laws. She met Mrs. Jameson, a widow who published essays under a male pseudonym. Dr. Benjamin Cross, a physician who advocated for public health reforms. Miss Sarah Mendez, a mathematician whose calculations were used by the Royal Society but never publicly credited. These people treated Eleanor's intelligence as an asset rather than a liability, her questions as contributions rather than impertinence. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt the edges of who she might become. But the Duke's invitation hung over everything, a storm cloud both threatening and promising. He'll send the carriage in 4 days, Lady Agatha observed one morning over breakfast. Have you decided? Eleanor set down her teacup with unsteady hands. I don't understand what he wants from me. Does that matter? The question is what you want for yourself. Lady Agatha's sharp eyes studied her. Christopher Montague is not an easy man. He's brilliant, demanding, and carries wounds he doesn't show, but he's also honorable in ways most men only pretend to be. If he's offering you Ravenswood, he sees something in you worth cultivating. Or he pities me, the jilted sister's overlooked sibling. Christopher doesn't do pity. It's not in his repertoire. Lady Agatha leaned forward. Let me tell you what I know about the Duke of Ravenswood. His father was a brutal man who beat his wife and ruled his estate like a tyrant. Christopher was sent away to school young, excelled at everything, joined the army to escape his father's house. When the old Duke died, under circumstances that raised questions but produced no answers, Christopher inherited a crumbling estate, debts, and a reputation for violence that wasn't entirely earned. Eleanor absorbed this, the puzzle pieces of Christopher's reputation beginning to form a more complex picture. He rebuilt Ravenswood through sheer will and brilliant management, Lady Agatha continued. Modernized the farms, invested in industry, treated his tenants with a fairness his father never showed. He's respected in Parliament, feared in business, and completely isolated socially because he refuses to play by rules he considers idiotic. The broken engagement? Eleanor asked quietly. Lady Henrietta Wainwright, beautiful, accomplished, perfect by every society standard. Lady Agatha's expression turned grim. She broke the engagement days before the wedding, claiming she couldn't marry a man she feared. The truth, which eventually emerged, was that she'd been conducting an affair with her father's steward and used Christopher's reputation as cover for her escape. He never defended himself publicly, never explained, just let society believe he was a monster. Eleanor felt a surge of indignant fury on Christopher's behalf. That's abominable. Yes, but it taught him to value substance over surface, honesty over performance. When he danced with you, when he extended that invitation, he was making a statement that you matter more than every vapid debutante who's ever crossed his path. Lady Agatha's voice softened. The question, Eleanor, is whether you believe that about yourself. Did she? Eleanor wasn't certain. 22 years of being overlooked, of making herself small, of accepting secondary importance, those patterns didn't dissolve in a week, no matter how revolutionary the circumstances. But something was changing. In Lady Agatha's drawing room, discussing philosophy with people who listened to her contributions. In the library, reading books that challenged rather than soothed. In the mornings, waking without the weight of her mother's disappointment or Charlotte's thoughtless cruelty. A letter arrived from Charlotte on the 5th day. Eleanor opened it with trembling hands. Dearest Eleanor, the annulment will be finalized next week. Mama says I am ruined, that no respectable man will have me now, that I should have been more careful, more engaging, more everything. She blames you somehow for making the scandal worse by attracting the Duke's attention. I wanted to hate you for that, for having what I don't, his interest, the ton's speculation. But I find I cannot. The truth is, Harrison was dreadful. I knew it and ignored it because the title mattered more than my happiness. He was cold, controlling, dismissive. The humiliation of the wedding was terrible, but Eleanor, the marriage would have been worse. Perhaps in some twisted way, his cruelty saved me from a lifetime of misery. I hear you're with Lady Agatha, that you're attending her salons, that you look different, alive in ways you never did before. I'm glad. You were always cleverer than me, kinder than me, better than the role we forced you into. I don't know what will become of me now, but I wanted you to know. Go to Ravenswood if he's truly invited you. Don't let our family's expectations trap you the way they trapped me. Be brave enough for both of us. Your sister, Charlotte Eleanor, read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the ink. Charlotte's words felt like absolution, like permission for a future she hadn't dared imagine. On the 7th day, Lady Agatha found Eleanor in the library, curled in a window seat with Plato's Republic open on her lap, but unread. The carriage will arrive this afternoon, Lady Agatha said gently. Have you packed? Eleanor looked up, meeting the older woman's knowing gaze. What if I disappoint him? What if I'm not enough? Oh, darling girl. Lady Agatha sat beside her, taking her hands. You've spent your entire life being told you're not enough. Smart enough, pretty enough, charming enough, important enough, but those were the judgments of people who measured worth in the wrong currency. She squeezed Eleanor's fingers. Christopher Montague sees value others miss. Trust his judgment, even if you can't yet trust your own. Will you tell me honestly, is he dangerous? To you? No. To the version of yourself you've been pretending to be? Absolutely. Lady Agatha smiled. He'll challenge you, demand you match his intelligence, expect you to have opinions and defend them. He won't let you hide or diminish yourself. For someone who spent 22 years being invisible, that will be terrifying. And if I refuse, if I stay here, then you'll be welcome for as long as you wish. You'll continue attending my salons, reading, learning. You'll build a life of the mind, which is no small thing. Lady Agatha's expression turned serious. But you'll always wonder, what if you'd been brave? What if you'd said yes to the most interesting man in England when he offered you his world? Eleanor stood, decision crystallizing in her chest like ice becoming diamond, clear, hard, unbreakable. I need to pack. The carriage arrived at 4 o'clock precisely. It was exactly what Eleanor expected from the Duke of Ravenswood. Expensive without being ostentatious, perfectly maintained, practical rather than decorative. The driver, an older man with kind eyes and a Northumberland accent, introduced himself as Davies and handled Eleanor's trunk with respectful efficiency. Lady Agatha embraced her at the door. Write to me. Visit when you can. Remember that you're extraordinary, even if you haven't believed it yet. Thank you, Eleanor whispered, for everything. Thank me by living, truly living. That's all the gratitude I require. As the carriage rolled through London streets toward the Great North Road, Eleanor watched the city give way to countryside. The June landscape was lush and green, England at its most beautiful. Each mile took her farther from the life she'd known and closer to something unknown and thrilling. They travelled for 3 days, stopping at respectable coaching inns where rooms had been reserved in advance. Eleanor noticed details, the quality of the accommodations, the respect with which the Duke's staff were treated, the efficiency of the arrangements. Christopher Montague, she was beginning to understand, took care of what was his. The question, terrifying and exhilarating, was whether she would become one of those things he protected. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Davies pointed through the carriage window. First sight of Ravenswood, miss. Eleanor leaned forward and felt her breath catch. The estate rose from the Northumberland landscape like something from a Gothic novel. Ancient stone towers, crenellated walls, vast and imposing and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with prettiness. Behind the castle, moors stretched toward distant hills, wild and windswept. The late afternoon sun painted everything in gold and shadow. It looked like the kind of place where significant things happened, where people became more than they had been. As the carriage rolled through Ravenswood's gates, Eleanor caught sight of a figure waiting on the front steps. Tall, dark-haired, utterly still. Christopher Montague, the Winter Duke, watching her arrival with an expression she couldn't read from this distance. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She smoothed her travelling dress, touched her hair, then stopped herself. No more pretending to be decorative. No more apologizing for taking up space. The carriage halted. Davies opened the door. Eleanor stepped down onto the gravel drive, tilting her head back to meet the Duke's storm-grey gaze. "Miss Eleanor," Christopher said, his voice carrying across the space between them. "Welcome to Ravenswood. I've been waiting for you." He descended the steps with that predatory grace she remembered, stopping just close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. He was even more imposing in his own domain, a dark lord in a dark castle, every inch the Winter Duke of reputation. But his eyes held warmth when he looked at her. Not the cold assessment she'd feared, but genuine welcome. "I wasn't certain you'd come," he admitted. "Neither was I," Eleanor replied honestly, "until the moment I stepped into the carriage. And now? Any regrets?" Eleanor looked past him at the ancient castle, the wild moors, the storm gathering on the horizon. She thought of Charlotte's letter, Lady Agatha's lessons, the person she might become if she were brave enough. "Not yet," she said. "Ask me again tomorrow." Christopher's smile was slow, transforming his severe features into something dangerously appealing. "Tomorrow and every day after. Come inside, Eleanor. Let me show you what happens when brilliant women stop hiding their light." He offered his arm. Eleanor hesitated only a heartbeat before placing her hand on his sleeve. As thunder rumbled in the distance and the first drops of rain began to fall, Eleanor Hartwell crossed the threshold of Ravenswood and stepped into the rest of her life. Behind them, the storm broke in earnest, wild and cleansing and full of possibility. The storm that had welcomed Eleanor to Ravenswood raged for 3 days, as though the heavens themselves needed to match the turbulence of her transformation. During those days, locked inside the ancient castle with the most fascinating man she'd ever encountered, Eleanor discovered what it meant to be truly seen. Ravenswood's interior defied her expectations. Where she'd anticipated Gothic gloom, she found light. Great windows that captured every shift of the storm-darkened sky, walls painted in warm creams and soft greys, modern comforts integrated seamlessly with medieval architecture. The library alone contained more books than Eleanor had seen in her entire life, arranged not by decorative appearance, but by subject. Natural philosophy, political economy, classical literature in original languages, modern poetry, mathematics. "My father believed books were for show," Christopher had told her on the first evening, watching her circle the library like a starving person confronted with a feast. "I rebuilt this collection from almost nothing after he died. Read whatever you wish. I prefer my guests to be intellectually engaged rather than prettily bored." "I'm a guest, then." His eyes had captured hers with that unsettling intensity. "You're whatever you choose to be. Guest implies temporariness. I'm hoping for something more permanent." That conversation had established a pattern. Christopher didn't flirt in the traditional sense, no flowery compliments or practiced charm. Instead, he challenged her, questioned her opinions, expected her to defend her positions, and readily admitted when her arguments were superior to his own. They debated political philosophy over breakfast, argued about poetry during afternoon tea, discussed agricultural innovation and industrial development during long dinners. Christopher treated Eleanor's intelligence as something valuable, her insights as contributions rather than amusing novelties. "You've read Adam Smith," he'd observed on the second day, genuine surprise in his voice. "Lady Agatha believes economic literacy is essential for women who wish to understand power structures. Lady Agatha is a radical and a genius. What did you think of his invisible hand theory?" Eleanor had paused, considering. "Elegant, but incomplete. It assumes rational actors and equal access to information, neither of which exist in reality. The invisible hand often guides wealth toward those who already possess it." Christopher had smiled, that rare, transformative expression that made him look younger and infinitely more approachable. "Exactly. I've made that same argument to Parliament. They find it inconvenient. But the intellectual connection, thrilling as it was, existed alongside something more dangerous, a physical awareness that grew stronger with each passing hour. Eleanor found herself noticing things she had no business noticing. The way Christopher's hands moved when he gestured during conversation, strong, precise, with a surgeon's deliberate grace. The breadth of his shoulders beneath his coat. The rare moments when he smiled, transforming severity into devastating appeal. The timbre of his voice when he leaned close to show her something in a book, his breath warm against her ear. She was, Eleanor realized, with equal parts terror and exhilaration, developing feelings for the Winter Duke. Feelings that had nothing to do with titles or security, and everything to do with the man himself, brilliant, complex, wounded, and unexpectedly kind. On the evening of the third day, the storm finally broke. Sunset painted the clouds in apocalyptic shades of orange and purple, light streaming through Ravenswood's windows in golden shafts. Eleanor stood in the music room, studying a pianoforte that looked both ancient and impeccably maintained. "My mother played," Christopher's voice came from the doorway. Eleanor turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. She was gifted. My father hated it, said music was frivolous. After she died, I made sure the instrument was preserved. It seemed important. "How did she die?" Eleanor asked softly. The question was impertinent, but something in the moment demanded honesty over propriety. Christopher moved into the room, his steps measured. The official cause was a fall down the stairs. She broke her neck. He stopped beside the piano, running one hand along its polished surface. "I was 17, away at school. When I came home for the funeral, the servants wouldn't meet my eyes. My father was coldly triumphant in his grief, as though he'd won some contest I hadn't known existed." "Christopher," Eleanor breathed, understanding flooding through her. "I never proved anything, but I know." His jaw tightened, storm-grey eyes going distant. 3 years later, he suffered an apoplexy during an argument with his steward, an argument about tenant evictions I'd explicitly instructed be cancelled. His death was natural, witnessed, unquestionable, but society loves a Gothic tale, and a son who benefits from his father's death is too delicious a villain to waste on facts. Eleanor moved closer, drawn by something stronger than caution. The engagement, Lady Henrietta. She believed the rumours. She professed to, which was convenient when she needed to end our betrothal without admitting her real reasons. He looked at Eleanor directly, vulnerability showing through his carefully maintained control. "I thought I'd made peace with society's judgment, decided I didn't need their approval or understanding. But then I saw you at that catastrophic wedding, hidden behind your pillar, and I realized I was tired of being alone with my righteousness." "You weren't alone," Eleanor said quietly. "You had this beautiful estate, your political work, your investments. I had accomplishments, successes, but no one to share them with, no one who saw me rather than the reputation." He turned fully to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made Eleanor's breath catch. "And then there was you. Intelligent, brave, completely wasted on people who couldn't see your value. Standing in that ballroom defending your sister against a man who deserved far worse than words. I looked at you and thought, here is someone who understands what it means to be overlooked, dismissed, judged on superficial measures. I wanted to know you, wanted you to know me." "I do want to know you," Eleanor whispered. "I think I'm beginning to." Christopher stepped closer, near enough that Eleanor could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight irregularity in his nose that suggested it had been broken and healed, near enough that she could feel the heat of him, solid and real and present. "Eleanor Hartwell, I need to be clear about my intentions before this goes any further." His voice dropped to that dark velvet register that made her nerve endings spark. "I didn't bring you to Ravenswood for a brief visit or a charitable rescue. I brought you here because I want you in my life, permanently, as my Duchess, my partner, my intellectual equal and constant companion." Eleanor's heart stopped, then resumed at double speed. That's marriage. You're proposing marriage." "I'm declaring interest in marriage. The proposal will come when you're ready to hear it, when you're certain this is what you want, rather than an escape from circumstances." His hand lifted, hovering near her face but not touching, waiting for permission. "I won't trap you the way Sterling trapped your sister. Everything I'm offering comes with the freedom to refuse." Eleanor thought about her life a month ago. The invisibility, the resignation, the certain knowledge that she would never be chosen, never be valued. She thought about Charlotte's letter, Lady Agatha's lessons, the person she was becoming in this ancient castle with this complicated man. "I'm not ready to answer yet," she said honestly, "but I'm not refusing either. I need time to be certain I'm choosing you rather than escaping my family, to know if what I'm feeling is real." take all the time you need." Christopher's smile was gentle, understanding. "Ravenswood isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. Stay, learn, become whoever you're meant to be. If at the end of that process you decide I'm part of that future, I'll be honored. If not, I'll help you build whatever life you choose." The generosity of that offer, the sheer decency of allowing her agency, broke something loose in Eleanor's chest. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and placed her hand over his heart, felt it beating strong and steady beneath her palm. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me, for giving me this chance." And Christopher covered her hand with his own, thumb brushing across her knuckles in a touch that sent shivers down her spine. "I should thank you for being brave enough to accept an invitation from a man with my reputation. Society believes me dangerous." "You are dangerous," Eleanor agreed, lifting her gaze to meet his. "To complacency, to injustice, to the version of myself I was pretending to be, but not to me. Never to me." They stood in the music room as the last of the stormlight faded. Two people who understood what it meant to be misjudged, finding recognition in each other's eyes. And then Christopher did something unexpected. He sat at the pianoforte, positioned his hands over the keys, and began to play. The music that filled the room was achingly beautiful, some classical piece Eleanor didn't recognize, played with technical precision and surprising emotion. She watched his hands move across the keys, watched his severe expression soften with concentration, and felt her heart complete its surrender. This was the Winter Duke beneath the reputation, a man who preserved his dead mother's piano and played it in the gathering darkness for a woman he hoped would stay. When the music ended, silence held for a long moment. "That was beautiful," Eleanor said finally. "My mother taught me before she died. I haven't played for another person in 14 years. He stood, turning to face her. "You make me want to be known, Eleanor. Fully known. The parts I show Parliament and the parts I keep private. The accomplishments and the wounds, all of it." "Then show me," Eleanor replied, "all of it. I'm not fragile enough to need protective editing." Christopher laughed, a real laugh, surprised and delighted. "No, you're not fragile at all. You're extraordinary, and you're only beginning to realize it." As they left the music room together, Eleanor's hand tucked companionably into the crook of Christopher's arm, she understood what was happening. Not a rescue or a romantic fantasy, but something rarer, genuine partnership beginning to take root. Two intelligent people choosing to know each other, to challenge each other, to build something together from honesty rather than social performance. The next morning, Eleanor woke to sunshine streaming through her bedroom windows. The storm finally passed. She found Christopher in the library, reading correspondence, and he looked up at her entrance with a smile that made her stomach flutter. "I need to return to London next week," he said without preamble. "Parliament is in session, and there's a vote on factory reforms I can't miss. Come with me. Not to my townhouse. That would damage your reputation beyond recovery. Stay with Lady Agatha again, but let me court you properly. Drives in the park, theatre attendance, chaperoned visits. Let society see that I'm not the monster they believe, and that you're not the overlooked sister they dismissed." Eleanor considered this, weighing risks and possibilities. "They'll speculate, make assumptions about why you're interested in me. Let them. The ton thrives on speculation. But I want you to have the option of returning to society on your terms, with my support but not my scandal overshadowing you." His eyes turned serious. "If you decide you don't want this, I don't want you permanently marked by association with me." "And if I decide I do want this?" Christopher's smile turned heated, promising, "Then we'll let them speculate all they want, while we build exactly the life we choose, together." Eleanor thought about stepping back into London society, not as the shadow sister, but as herself, intelligent, opinionated, courted by a duke, terrifying, thrilling, possible. "Yes," she said, "let's return to London, but Christopher, When we go to the theatre or drive in the park, I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. No vapid giggling or performative delicacy. They're getting the real Eleanor Hartwell or nothing at all. I wouldn't have it any other way. He stood, crossing to where she stood, and took both her hands in his. You're magnificent exactly as you are. Never forget that. As Eleanor looked up into storm-grey eyes that saw all of her, the intelligence, the strength, the emerging confidence, she felt the last chains of her old life fall away. She was Eleanor Hartwell, brilliant and brave, and beginning to believe she deserved everything the Winter Duke was offering. The question of marriage remained unanswered. But standing in Ravenswood's library, with sunshine pouring through ancient windows, and the most fascinating man in England holding her hands, Eleanor understood something crucial. For the first time in her life, she was choosing her own path, and whatever she decided, she would never again make herself invisible to please people who couldn't see her value. The Shadow Sister had stepped into the light, and the light, it turned out, was glorious. London in July was a contradiction, beautiful and suffocating, glittering and cruel. Eleanor returned to find the Tun in full seasonal frenzy, every drawing-room buzzing with the most delicious scandal in years, the Winter Duke's interest in the jilted bride's overlooked sister. Lady Agatha welcomed Eleanor back to Russell Square with characteristic directness. You've returned different. Good. Now prepare yourself. Society is going to test you in ways Ravenswood's isolation didn't. She was right. The moment Eleanor and Christopher made their first public appearance together, a promenade through Hyde Park during the fashionable hour, the speculation became a roar. Christopher had been absolutely correct about one thing. Courting Eleanor properly, in full view of society, created a protective barrier around her reputation while simultaneously declaring his intentions to anyone paying attention, which was everyone. Their first drive through the park was a masterclass in social warfare. Christopher handed Eleanor into his curricle with ceremonious care, then drove with one hand while the other rested casually near hers on the seat, not touching, but close enough that the intimacy was unmistakable. He nodded to acquaintances with cool politeness, but stopped for no one, making it clear that Eleanor commanded his complete attention. Eleanor felt hundreds of eyes tracking their progress, heard the whispers that followed them like a wave. That's her? The sister? Not nearly as pretty as Charlotte. What does Ravenswood see in her? Perhaps she's clever. They say he values intellect over beauty. That last whisper, grudgingly approving, came from Mrs. Jameson, Lady Agatha's friend. Eleanor caught her eye and received a discreet nod of encouragement. "Ignore them," Christopher murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "They're recalibrating their opinions, which is always noisy. I'm not pretty enough to justify your attention by conventional standards." Eleanor stated this as fact rather than complaint. "They're confused. Let them be confused. Their inability to see your value doesn't make it less real." He turned his head, catching her gaze with that intensity that never failed to make her breath catch. "You're extraordinary, Eleanor. If they can't perceive that, the failure is theirs." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Christopher courted Eleanor with single-minded determination, and society gradually, grudgingly, began to accept that the Winter Duke's interest was genuine. They attended the theatre, where Christopher sat close enough that his sleeve brushed Eleanor's, leaning in to whisper sardonic commentary about the overwrought performances that made her stifle laughter. They visited museums, where Christopher delighted in Eleanor's observations about classical sculpture and medieval manuscripts. They dined at Lady Agatha's, where conversation ranged from political philosophy to scientific discoveries, and Eleanor held her own against some of the sharpest minds in London. And slowly, imperceptibly, Eleanor's reputation transformed. She was no longer the overlooked sister or the spinster daughter. She became Miss Eleanor Hartwell, the lady who captured the Duke of Ravenswood's interest through sheer intelligence. The Tun, always hungry for narrative, embraced this new story with enthusiasm. But not everyone was pleased with Eleanor's ascension. 3 weeks into the London season, Eleanor and Lady Agatha attended a garden party at Lady Pemberton's country house just outside the city. Christopher had been detained at Parliament, but was expected to join them later. Eleanor navigated the gathering with growing confidence, discussing literature with Mrs. Jameson and political economy with Dr. Cross, barely noticing when Charlotte and Lady Marguerite arrived. It was the first time Eleanor had seen her mother and sister since leaving for Ravenswood. Charlotte looked subdued in lavender muslin, her beauty dimmed by unhappiness but still striking. Their mother appeared brittle, her social smile not reaching her eyes. They stood at the periphery of the party, occupying the unenviable position of scandalous curiosities, invited out of obligation but not truly welcomed. Eleanor felt a complicated surge of emotions: pity, anger, residual hurt, and something that might have been forgiveness. Before she could decide whether to approach them, Charlotte caught sight of her and crossed the garden with determined steps. "Eleanor?" Charlotte's voice was quiet, uncertain. "You look well. So do you." It wasn't entirely true, but kindness cost Eleanor nothing. "How are you managing?" "The annulment is finalized. I'm technically unmarried, but functionally ruined." Charlotte's laugh was hollow. "Mama is negotiating with a widower in Northumberland, much older, quite rich, willing to overlook my scandal for a reduced dowry. I'll be married by autumn to a man I've never met and relocated far from London's gossip." Eleanor felt her chest constrict with sympathetic pain. "Charlotte, I'm so sorry." "Don't be. It's the best outcome available to me now." Charlotte glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. "I wanted to apologize. For years of cruelty, dismissiveness, allowing Mama to make you invisible because it benefited me. You deserved better." "Thank you," Eleanor said softly. "That means more than you know." "The Duke? Christopher? He's serious about you." "I believe so. We're getting to know each other, deciding if we suit." Charlotte's expression turned wistful. "I thought I wanted what you have. The title, the attention, the importance, but watching you two at the theatre last week, the way he looks at you, like you're the only person in the room, I realized I never wanted that. I wanted security and status, which isn't the same as being seen." She touched Eleanor's hand briefly. "Be happy. You've earned it." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion at the garden entrance drew everyone's attention. Harrison Sterling had arrived, Miss Arabella Thornton on his arm, both of them dressed with conspicuous expense and wearing expressions of aggressive confidence. Lady Pemberton looked distinctly unhappy. Clearly they'd arrived uninvited, but protocol demanded she welcome them. The crowd parted, conversations faltering, as the architect of the season's greatest scandal strolled into the gathering as though he owned it. Harrison's eyes found Charlotte first, then Eleanor, and his smile turned cruel. "The Hartwell sisters together again. How touching. One of you ruined, the other desperately clinging to a duke's fleeting interest. Quite the matching set of failures." The garden fell silent, everyone waiting to see how this confrontation would unfold. Charlotte paled, her composure cracking. Eleanor felt rage ignite in her chest, cold, clarifying fury. "Mr. Sterling!" Eleanor's voice cut across the silence like a blade. "Your presence here demonstrates either remarkable courage or breathtaking lack of self-awareness. Given what I know of your character, I'm confident it's the latter." Harrison's face darkened. "You presume to judge me? A nobody who's caught a duke's attention through means I dare not speculate on publicly. No, you'd rather speculate privately, which is the coward's way." Eleanor stepped forward, her grey dress and straight spine suddenly looking regal rather than plain. "You humiliated a woman on her wedding day because you lacked the courage to be honest before vows were spoken. You blamed her for your own moral bankruptcy, and now you arrive uninvited to a social gathering to inflict further pain because cruelty is the only power you possess." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Arabella Thornton clutched Harrison's arm, her pretty face ugly with spite. "How dare you speak to your betters in such manner?" "My betters?" Eleanor's laugh was genuine, almost pitying. "Miss Thornton, you conspired to ruin another woman's life so you could claim her place. That makes you many things, but better isn't among them." "This is outrageous!" Harrison's voice rose, his composure finally cracking. "Lady Pemberton, I demand this woman be removed." "You demand nothing in my home, Mr. Sterling." A new voice, cold and commanding, cut through the confrontation. Christopher Ashford. Montague stood at the garden entrance, and the assembled company froze like rabbits sensing a wolf. The Winter Duke had arrived. Christopher moved through the crowd with that predatory grace, people instinctively stepping back to let him pass. He stopped beside Eleanor, his presence both protective and possessive. "Miss Eleanor speaks only truth, which I recognize is unfamiliar territory for you, Sterling." Christopher's voice was calm, but the rage beneath it was palpable. "She's demonstrated more courage and character in 2 minutes than you've managed in your entire parasitic existence." Harrison opened his mouth, then closed it. Survival instinct finally overriding arrogance. Christopher's reputation wasn't entirely unearned. He was known to be dangerous when provoked, and no one wanted to test those limits. "I think," Lady Pemberton said into the tense silence, "that Mr. Sterling and Miss Thornton have perhaps concluded their visit. Adams, if you would see them to their carriage." Harrison and Arabella had no choice but to retreat, their dramatic entrance ending in humiliating dismissal. As they departed, scattered applause broke out among the guests. Quiet but unmistakable approval of Eleanor's stand. Christopher turned to Eleanor, his storm-grey eyes warm with pride and something deeper, more profound. "Magnificently done. I didn't plan. You defended someone who needed defending, including yourself. You refused to let a bully dominate the narrative." He took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture achingly tender, despite the public setting. "Eleanor Hartwell, you are exactly who I thought you were. Brave, brilliant, uncompromising in your integrity." Lady Agatha appeared at Eleanor's other side, grinning like a proud parent. "That was spectacular. Every matron in this garden is recalibrating their assessment of you. By tomorrow you'll be legendary." Charlotte still stood nearby, tears streaming down her face, but these were different tears, grateful, relieved tears. She mouthed "thank you" to Eleanor before their mother swept her away, Lady Marguerite's expression complex and unreadable. That evening, Christopher and Eleanor walked through Lady Pemberton's gardens, while sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. The party continued inside, but they'd slipped away, needing privacy after the public confrontation. "You understand what happened today?" Christopher asked quietly. "You publicly aligned yourself with me, defended values I hold, demonstrated the person you are beyond any doubt. Society witnessed it. They'll connect you to me permanently now." "I know." Eleanor stopped, turning to face him. "I wasn't thinking about society or consequences. I was thinking that Harrison Sterling is a villain who needed to be called exactly what he is, and that I was tired of staying silent. This is who you are now, who you were always meant to be." Christopher reached up, cupping her face with one hand, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Eleanor, I've waited weeks to ask this properly, to give you time to be certain, but I can't wait any longer." Eleanor's heart began to race. She knew what was coming, had known since Ravenswood, perhaps since that first waltz at Charlotte's catastrophic wedding. Christopher lowered himself to one knee on the garden path, exactly as he'd done in that ballroom, but this time with different intent. He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Eleanor Hartwell, you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Brilliant, brave, infuriating in the best possible way. You challenge me, match me, make me want to be better. I'm not an easy man. I'm demanding, isolated by choice, carrying wounds and a reputation that will always complicate your life. But I love you. Completely, irrevocably. I want to build a life with you at Ravenswood, in London, wherever we choose. I want intellectual partnership and passionate argument and quiet mornings, reading together. I want everything with you. Will you marry me? Will you be my duchess, my partner, my constant companion and equal? Eleanor looked down at the Winter Duke, kneeling in the garden as the sunset turned the world golden, offering her everything she'd never dared imagine wanting. She thought about the girl she'd been, invisible, resigned, certain she would never be chosen. She thought about Charlotte's letter, Lady Agatha's lessons, the person she'd become in Ravenswood's library and London's drawing rooms. She thought about Christopher's fierce intelligence, his unexpected kindness, the way he saw all of her and valued what he found. And Eleanor Hartwell, no longer a shadow sister but a woman in her own right, gave the only answer possible. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Christopher, I'll marry you, not because of your title or your estate or your protection, but because I love you, because you saw me when no one else did, because you make me brave enough to be fully myself." Christopher surged to his feet, pulling Eleanor into his arms and kissing her with the passionate intensity of a man who'd been holding back for weeks. Eleanor kissed him back, her hands fisting in his coat, joy and desire and profound rightness flooding through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Christopher rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you, Eleanor, every day of our lives together I will see you, value you, challenge you to be even more extraordinary than you already are." "And I promise to do the same," Eleanor replied. "To match your intelligence, call out your brooding nonsense, and never let you forget that the Winter Duke has a heart, even if he hides it from the rest of the world." Christopher laughed, the sound free and joyful. "This is going to be spectacular." They returned to the party hand in hand, Christopher's mother's ring, a simple band of sapphires and diamonds, now gracing Eleanor's finger. Lady Agatha took one look at them and burst into delighted laughter. The news spread through the gathering like wildfire. The Winter Duke was engaged to Eleanor Hartwell, and from the radiance of both their faces, this was a love match rather than strategic alliance. By morning, all of London would know. The Shadow Sister would officially become the Duchess of Ravenswood. But that night, walking back to Russell Square with Lady Agatha, while Christopher departed for his townhouse, Eleanor felt only profound peace. She'd chosen her path, and it was glorious. 9 months after the most spectacular wedding London society had witnessed in a decade, Eleanor Ashford Montague, Duchess of Ravenswood, stood at the window of her private study, watching snow fall across the Northumberland moors. Winter had arrived early, transforming the landscape into something from a fairy tale, beautiful, harsh, perfect. Behind her, the study, her study, a room Christopher had insisted she claim and furnish exactly as she wished, reflected the life she'd built at Ravenswood. Shelves overflowed with books in multiple languages. Her correspondence desk held letters from Lady Agatha, Mrs. Jameson, and a growing network of intellectual women across England and the continent. The walls displayed maps of the estate, architectural drawings for the school she and Christopher were building for tenant children, and a small portrait Lady Agatha had commissioned, Eleanor in grey silk, reading utterly herself. The transformation from overlooked sister to Duchess of Ravenswood had been both dramatic and surprisingly natural. Eleanor had expected struggle, had anticipated feeling inadequate to the role's demands. Instead, she discovered that intelligence, compassion, and genuine interest in people's welfare were far more valuable than the social graces her mother had once insisted were paramount. The estate managers respected her input on agricultural improvements. The tenants brought their concerns to her directly, trusting her to advocate for fair treatment. Parliament wives who'd once dismissed her now sought her opinion on reform legislation. And Christopher, her brilliant, complicated, extraordinary husband, treated her as the equal partner he'd promised she would be. Their marriage had surprised everyone, including themselves. The passion was expected, the intellectual partnership was anticipated, but the sheer domestic happiness, the comfortable silences, the shared laughter, the way they moved around each other like dance partners who'd been together for decades rather than months, that had been an unexpected gift. Eleanor touched the window glass, feeling the cold through her fingertips. In London, the season continued without her. She and Christopher had returned to Ravenswood after Christmas, preferring the northern winter to the city's social performance. Here they could work together on estate improvements, host intimate gatherings of interesting people, and simply exist without constant scrutiny. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. "Enter," she called. Mrs. Phillips, the housekeeper who'd served Ravenswood for 30 years, stepped inside with her usual efficient warmth. "Your Grace, Mr. Thomas Hartwell has arrived. Shall I show him to the drawing room?" Eleanor's brother. She hadn't seen Thomas since the wedding, though they'd corresponded regularly. "Yes, please, and have tea prepared. He'll be frozen from the journey." 20 minutes later, Eleanor embraced her brother in Ravenswood's drawing room. Thomas looked well, his London legal practice thriving, his letters suggested, but his eyes held concern. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said, gesturing him to a chair near the fire. "Your letter said it was important?" Thomas accepted tea from a servant, waiting until they were alone before speaking. "I wanted to tell you in person. Charlotte is married." Eleanor felt her chest tighten. "To the Northumberland widower Mama mentioned?" "No. That engagement was broken when the gentleman discovered Charlotte's dowry was significantly smaller than promised. Apparently Mama gambled away most of it trying to recoup social position." Thomas's expression turned gentle. "Charlotte married someone else entirely, Mr. Edward Green, a solicitor in my firm." Eleanor blinked, surprise replacing anxiety. "A solicitor? Mama must be horrified." "Mama didn't attend the wedding. Neither did Father. Charlotte and Edward married quietly 3 months ago." Thomas pulled a letter from his coat. "She asked me to give you this. She wanted you to know she's happy." Eleanor took the letter with shaking hands, recognizing Charlotte's handwriting. She broke the seal and read, "Dearest Eleanor, by the time you read this, I will be married to a good man who has no title, no grand estate, and no interest in society's approval. Edward is kind, intelligent, and sees me, really sees me, the way Christopher sees you. He knows about the scandal and Harrison and all of it, and he chose me anyway. Not for connections or beauty or status, but because he values who I am. We're living in a modest house in Greenwich. I manage our household, tend a small garden, read books Edward recommends, and find myself unexpectedly, impossibly happy. I'm learning that the life I thought I wanted, the title, the grand marriage, the social prominence, would have destroyed me. Harrison did me a favor, though I couldn't see it at the time. You taught me something important when you defended me at that wedding, when you called Harrison exactly what he was, despite the consequences. You showed me that dignity isn't about titles or society's approval. It's about living honestly, courageously, as yourself. I'm doing that now, finally. Mama won't forgive me for marrying beneath myself after everything she sacrificed for my prospects. But I find I don't require her forgiveness. I have Edward's love, a life of my own choosing, and the memory of a sister who was brave enough to show me there was another path. Thank you, Eleanor, for everything. With love and gratitude, Charlotte Green Eleanor read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. But these were joyful tears, relieved tears. Charlotte had found her own Ravenswood, her own Christopher. Different circumstances, different details, but the same essential victory, choosing herself over expectations, building happiness rather than performing it. "She's well then?" Thomas asked gently. "She's more than well. She's free." Eleanor wiped her eyes, smiling. "Thank you for bringing this, for supporting her when our parents wouldn't." "Someone had to." Thomas's expression turned assessing. "And you? Marriage to the Winter Duke suits you. You look radiant, Eleanor, genuinely happy." "I am, more than I ever imagined possible." As if summoned by the conversation, Christopher appeared in the drawing-room doorway, snow dusting his dark coat from an inspection of the estate's northern properties. His eyes found Eleanor immediately, storm-grey gaze warming when he saw her smile. "Thomas, welcome to Ravenswood." Christopher crossed to shake her brother's hand before moving to Eleanor's side, his hand settling naturally at the small of her back. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult. Worth it to see my sister thriving." Thomas stood, collecting his coat. "I should return to the village inn before the snow worsens. But Eleanor, one more thing. There's talk in London about you and Christopher, specifically about the school you're establishing. Some of the more progressive MPs are interested in your model, considering recommending it as policy. You're becoming influential, sister, in ways that matter." After Thomas departed, Eleanor and Christopher stood together at the window, watching snow blanket the moors in white silence. "Charlotte married for love," Eleanor said softly. "A solicitor with no title. Mamma must be apoplectic. Good for Charlotte, and devastating for your mother's social ambitions." Christopher pulled Eleanor closer, his arm around her waist. "Does it bother you that your family didn't attend her wedding? That the breach is permanent?" Eleanor considered this honestly. "Not as much as I once thought it would. Charlotte and Thomas are my family, the parts that matter. Mama and father made their choices, prioritized status over people. I'm sad for them, but I don't regret the distance. You've built a new family here." Christopher gestured to the estate beyond the window. "The tenants, the staff, Lady Agatha and our London circle. And me, if I count." Eleanor turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd offered her the world, and then stepped back to let her choose it for herself. "You count most of all." Christopher's smile was tender, transformative. He leaned down, kissing her with the easy intimacy of long partnership. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "Come with me," he said suddenly, taking her hand. "There's something I want to show you." He led her through Ravenswood's corridors to the music room, the same room where he'd first played piano for her, where they'd begun to truly know each other. But now the room was different. The pianoforte remained, but beside it stood a new addition, a beautiful writing desk positioned to catch the light from the tall windows. "I had it commissioned," Christopher explained, watching Eleanor's face. "I know you have your study, but I thought, when I'm playing, you could be writing. Your essays for the political journals, your letters, your treatise on women's education that you keep saying you'll start." His expression turned vulnerable in a way that still made her breath catch. "I want to share this space with you, make music while you make arguments, both of us creating something meaningful." Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. This gift, this beautiful recognition of her work as valuable as his, this desire to create together in comfortable silence, was more romantic than any grand gesture could have been. "Christopher Montague, I love you." She crossed to him, framing his face with her hands. "So much for this, for everything, for seeing me. Always," he promised. "Every day for the rest of our lives, I will see you, Eleanor." They christened the music room properly, Christopher playing while Eleanor sat at her new desk, beginning the first chapter of the education treatise she'd been planning. The companionable silence, broken only by piano music and the scratch of her pen, felt like the most perfect evening imaginable. Later, much later, they stood together on Ravenswood's battlements as midnight approached, watching stars emerge between snow clouds. Eleanor leaned against her husband's chest, his arms wrapped around her, both of them bundled against the northern cold. "Do you ever miss it?" Christopher asked quietly. "London society, the balls and performances, being at the center of everything." Eleanor laughed softly. "Not even a little. I prefer this. Meaningful work, intellectual challenge, partnership with someone extraordinary. The ton can keep their performances. I have reality, which is infinitely better. We'll return to London for the parliamentary session. Your school project needs political support, and there are votes I can't miss." "I know, and I'll manage just fine in society now." Eleanor turned in his arms, looking up at the stars. Because I'm not trying to be someone else anymore. I'm exactly who I'm meant to be. Eleanor Hartwell Montague, Duchess of Ravenswood, advocate for education reform, wife to a brilliant man, and perfectly content with all of it. Perfectly content. How devastating. I was hoping to keep surprising you. Oh, you'll surprise me. You're too complicated not to. Eleanor's smile turned wicked. But the foundation is solid now. Everything else is just interesting details. Christopher's laugh echoed across the moors, warm and free. I love you, Eleanor, my brilliant, fierce, extraordinary Duchess. And I love you, my complicated, surprising, perfectly imperfect Duke. They kissed under the northern stars, two people who'd found each other across a crowded ballroom, who'd built something real from honesty and courage and mutual recognition. The Winter Duke and the Shadow Sister, no longer defined by those labels, just Christopher and Eleanor, building a life of meaning and joy and constant partnership. Behind them, Ravenswood stood ancient and solid, home to both their past wounds and their future possibilities. Inside, the music room waited for tomorrow's creations. The estate stretched out around them, improved by their shared efforts. London beckoned with challenges they would face together. Eleanor had once been invisible, overlooked, certain she would never be chosen. Now she stood on battlements like a queen in a fairy tale, except this was no fantasy. This was real life, hard-won and precious. She'd chosen herself, and in doing so, she'd found everything. The snow continued to fall, blanketing Northumberland in white silence, and in Ravenswood Castle, two people who understood what it meant to be misjudged held each other close and watched the stars emerge, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to surprise each other. They had bloomed where they were planted, and the flowering was only beginning. If you've listened to this story until the end, I want to thank you for joining Eleanor and Christopher on their journey from invisibility to recognition, from shadow to light. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more dramatic historical romances, and tell me in the comments, what was your favorite moment in this story? Was it the ballroom confrontation, the proposal in the garden, or perhaps the quiet happiness they found in Ravenswood? I read every comment and I love hearing your thoughts. Until the next story, remember that being truly seen by the right person can change everything.